Cloud. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Feedback Friday on a Thursday. That's great. Look at, I can see everyone pretty much. Well, we have two screens. Okay, let me check screen number 2. Looking good. Wonderful. Okay, so you all know I'm Kathy Hattori, Botanical Colors, and this is episode 12, right?
Yeah.
You put
Episode
11.
12. 12 weeks, Kathy.
12 weeks.
Of this.
12 weeks of sitting in my corner talking to y'all. So my state, Washington State, has just started opening up, and we're still afraid to go out, but it's nice to kind of be able to see that when I drive down the street, I can see people are respectfully waiting 6 feet apart to get into little cafes. So I think we're starting to kind of come back, and we'll see how we could just have a little sun. That would be nice. Sometimes in Seattle, the June weather, we call it Junuary because it rains and is freezing, and that's what we're having right now. Anyway, welcome. We're going to just do a Q&A today, and I have just questions everywhere coming at me. Amy is our moderator, and she is going to be the person who is going to be like telling me what to talk about next. And the only other thing is that questions are in chat. So if you have a question, just go ahead and add that to the chat. Amy's going to be fielding those and sending them to me because the chat text is really tiny. It's hard to read. And then after we're done with this, we'll talk about next week, and we'll talk about some upcoming classes that we have, both with Cara Marie Piazza and Abubakar Fofana, and next week's program with Kibibi Ajanku, who's going to be talking about the continuum of indigo from the old world, or actually from Africa to the South, and her studies there. So quite fascinating. And she's an amazing woman. So I think you're going to enjoy that next week. So without any further ado, we're just going to jump into Q&A. Amy?
Yes, Kathy.
I'm at your
Let us begin with Q&A. I'm going to start with the chat box, and then we'll go to the questions. I'm going to go back and forth to the piece of paper. Okay. So let's start with Gail's question. What is the best way to learn which plants have tannin?
What is the best way to learn which plants have tannin? A lot of plants have tannin. So I would say that leaves and bark, and of course the wood, have tannin in them. So we're talking trees and shrubs as opposed to flowers and grasses. That's kind of the huge divide that I would think about. So if you've got a daisy and you want to know if it has tannin, I would say minimal. But if you have an oak leaf or oak galls or acorns or the acorn caps or oak bark, tannin. Does that make sense to people? Like, kind of tannin is in a lot of really woody, barky, leafy stuff as a tree, and not so much in a flower or you know, a grass. I don't know why you would be trying to dye with a grass, but if you thought about that, then I would say lower tannin content. Also, if the product itself is brownish or tannish, it probably has tannin in it.
Is there a good book maybe, Kathy, that you could kind of refer Gail to on that?
Yes.
You can.
I don't have it here.
Okay.
I don't have it here, but yeah.
Okay. Let's so this is a question that was sent in. We're a little off our game, I feel, today. All right. I've recently
I'm on
planted
my
out
game,
my
okay?
Okay, all right. I will I'm gonna try to keep up with you then. I've recently planted out my Japanese indigo seedlings, and since then, some of the leaves have started to turn brown reddish on top. Is this normal or healthy?
This is not normal and it's not healthy, and I have exactly the same problem. I can't tell. So I'm using seed from Grand Prismatic, and they sprouted beautifully, but they are like burgundy. And I think I burned them with overfeeding them with fish emulsion, is what I think. So I'm looking at the new growth right now, and it's looking a lot greener and normal. So I think it will recover because it's very early in the season. At least for us here in the Pacific Northwest, my plants are maybe a foot tall, and you know they still look like young plants. So I'm not too worried. But if you go to Roland Ricketts' website, Ricketts Indigo, he has an entire section of his website devoted to cultivation of Persicaria, and he has a plant, and he's holding it, or somebody's holding it, and it says this is what it's supposed to look like, and it's this straight green plant, right? Mine are not straight; they're kind of flopping over, and they're kind of purplish red. But the new growth is green, so I'm hoping that within a month that it will have gotten over the shock of being fed with fish emulsion, which normally they love fish emulsion. So I'm a little surprised, but who knows? Yeah, so I think just wait it out as long as you're not overwatering and you're giving them reasonable feeding, because they do like a lot of nitrogen. Then they should kind of normalize after a while.
I know that I also planted Grand Prismatic, Kathy, and the indigo. And mine, I think I overwatered mine, but I left it in the pots, and then they're actually growing better just leaving them alone and not
Yeah,
taking. Like they want to grow like a weed almost or something.
I tend to fuss a little bit too much
Yeah.
Over them.
Okay. How about your thoughts on rhubarb? Is rhubarb light fast and wash fast?
Are we talking about pie plant rhubarb that we have here in the US? Or are we talking about the Chinese Asian rhubarb, which I call Himalayan rhubarb, Nepali rhubarb?
Let's see if Zahara will clarify that. We could always come back to it.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I can speak to it. I mean,
right. Yeah.
so
No,
rhubarb is typically a better performer on wool than it is on cotton. It's also extremely pH reactive, so it's really cool to work with it and like lower the pH and raise the pH because you get a complete range of colors. So like neutral pH, you kind of get this golden brown. If you raise the pH, you sort of move to sort of a purplish mulberry, reddish purplish mulberry color. And if you lower the pH with an acid, then you get a really bright gold. So it's kind of fun to just play with it. I would say it's probably not as light fast as other dyes, but on wool, it's a pretty good performer, what I found.
Back to some indigo question. What's the best type of organic vat to use for a large indigo vat, like 150 to 200 liters? And what's the best method to keep it warm and alive? That's my favorite thing, how you keep yours warm. Your special tool.
I do have a special tool. So I think we could differentiate between having a true traditional fermentation vat, which I have very little experience with. I did try it once, and I just, I drove everybody out of the studio because it just smelled like rotting garbage. But it did make a beautiful blue. But yeah, you have to have some pretty good ventilation if you're going to do it. And so that recipe was the traditional indigo, spent madder roots and wheat bran and calcium hydroxide. And I only made like a 20-liter vat. And my experience was that that was a pretty light blue, but you know, first time, I have no clue if I was doing it correctly, although I did get it to reduce. But if you're talking about like a 1, 2, 3 vat using an option of fructose or iron or henna, I tend to favor henna or iron, and really over between henna and iron, I like henna. But you can use all of those, and at a 200 liters, so that's like 50 gallons. That's a pretty big, you know, that's like a 55-gallon barrel. That's a nice sized vat, and you could do a lot of production work in it. It's just kind of your preference on what you're trying to do and what fibers you're using. So if you're looking at using all fibers, you would be using silks, wool, cashmere, then I would avoid iron, because the iron vat is very harsh. There's a high level of iron in the vat, and it's very harsh towards protein fibers. But if you're only doing cellulose, then an iron vat could be perfect. You know, plant fibers, hemp, linen, banana, anything like that. Then an iron vat could be great because it's strong, it's quick, and it's dark. So you could use that. So it kind of depends on what you're going to be dipping. If you're doing all fibers, I would stick with either fructose or henna, and I prefer henna over fructose. If you're wanting to do a traditional vat, I believe that's suitable for all fiber types, but it does take about 8 to 10 days just to set the vat. And it's really hard to do one here in the Pacific Northwest. It's just not warm enough. But if you are in a warmer area, it could be, you know, your vat of choice. In order to keep the vat warm, so typically in tropical areas, you don't have to have something that keeps the vat warm because it's warm enough. And then like in India or, you know, in Indonesia, it's pretty warm, so they don't have to heat their vats. In Japan, where it's more temperate to cooler, and other places, they do submerge their vats. And in Japan, they actually have in the floor these little, it used to be little charcoal braziers, but now it's heaters. And so your vat is underneath, so it's, the air isn't getting to it, and it's kept warm with some small, very warm, like a, I don't know how hot they get. Diane, you've been there, you would know, but it just keeps the vat warm enough so that it stays active. For those of us who, I cannot dig a hole in my floor in order to put, I would go down to the second level. The computer guy wouldn't be happy with me, it was underneath me. But so what we use is, where is it? Oh, here it is. My studio looks like something that Rube Goldberg would have invented. It's just crammed, but we use one of these. This is a bucket heater, and it's so what this is used for is drywall mud or horse troughs, in order to keep them from not freezing over. And they're about $40 to $45. And it looks like, I'll send you the reference. I bought this off of the sinful Amazon before I realized how bad they were. But it looks like this. You see a little horsey? Happy horse in the snow, because they've got.
Yeah, I'll put that on your horse trough warmer. On
yeah,
the
so
later.
this is in US electrical, so it's 1,000 watts. But we find that we use those for our 40 liter, is that right? Yeah, 40-liter vats, and it takes about 90 minutes to warm it up. And so, but it's great, especially where it's really cold here.
All right. Kathy, Lisa Cardoza is asking, if you want to re-dye something, do you need to re-mordant?
So my rule of thumb is if you're freshly re-dyeing something, no re-mordanting needed. If you have decided to strip color off by using either an acid or like even, bleach, then you can try just re-dyeing, but I've always re-mordanted with that. But if you've just got something and it's, you thought it was going to be rust and it's really brown and you now want to add another color and deepen the color or change the color, you do not need to re-mordant.
Okay. Zarina is asking, is it bad for the fabric to re-mordant with alum acetate if you've forgotten to label it? Is it bad for the fabric to re-mordant?
No.
Okay. Okay. We can answer them that fast. Why is the flower taken out of an indigo vat when you use it?
So a couple things that I've heard. One is that you're trying to just kind of remove the foam from the top of the vat so that when you're doing dipping that you're not catching all that foam either on your fabric or your yarn, because then you've just got something else left to wash out. The other thing I heard is that traditionally it's considered kind of like part of the nutrient base for the vat. So what that cluster of bubbles is oxidized pigment, right? So there is pigment in there. It's possible that that amount of pigment contributes to the vat. I don't see it, but I'm just following tradition. So I don't exactly know all the whys, but that's what I've heard.
I'll go into one of our sent-in questions. Kathy, could you speak more about, just making sure I wasn't muted, could you speak more about the science of water quality and flaking or flocculate in alum baths? Do you have recommendations for articles or books, resources that are more scientific about the chemistry of natural dyes and water?
So alum is used in wastewater treatment to flocculate solids out of the wastewater. So in a mordant bath, eventually it gets to the point where it's performing that same function. I've heard dyers just by practice, once it gets super flocculated or has like a lot of sort of gummy stuff floating around, that they stop using it and create a fresh bath. And this is typically after 5 to 7 uses of the alum bath. So it does eventually save water. And then I thought I read in Catherine Ellis's book that it doesn't matter, that that's just what it's going to do and you're fine. So I don't have any further information on that, but that's what I know about what alum does in a mordant bath. In terms of the chemistry of water quality and natural dyes, I don't think that it's possible you could do some searches on these scientific journals, where people are doing research and see if they're using different water sources and what's going on. But the idea of it is that depending on where you are in the world, your water is going to have some level of calcium and magnesium and potentially iron in it. And all of those contribute to how natural dyes attach to how the natural dye expresses itself on the fiber. So here in the Northwest, we have very acidic water, and there's no calcium in it and no magnesium. So when I just dye with our normal water, it's often our colors are quite clear and also rather pale, paler compared to somebody else. Like, I'm from San Jose, California, and we have tons of calcium and tons of magnesium in our water. And my reds were so much deeper in San Jose than they are here in Seattle. So in Seattle, we actually add calcium to our water to kind of develop the red when we're using madder. But if you're in Colorado or anywhere where you have limestone, which is where your aquifer comes from, your water comes from, then you probably don't need to add that much calcium. But we add calcium here because all of our water is snow melt. And so there's not very much mineralization of the water.
Question using iron. So when using an iron as a modifier, is there a specific way you can stop the process? I find it starts smudging the fabric while it's still active while washing it.
Is this for eco printing, you think?
I'm not sure. This is from Anna Lukala. So let's see.
So if it's for eco printing, I don't really have much experience with that. I'm wondering if Brees would like to jump in and give us her feedback on that.
So the way I use iron with eco printing is through rusty washers and nails and items like that. I don't really use iron as, you know, the iron that you sell, Kathy. So I have not had that problem. I'm not sure.
I think I saw Anna said it's for drawing. So
yeah, she just, on newly dyed fabrics.
She draws with the iron?
So I would thicken the iron with something, you know, either guar gum or, probably guar gum or some sort of thickener. And if you're talking about it running and just bleeding out like that, is that what you're talking about, Anna? Okay, so if it's bleeding, then I would thicken it. Because if you put a thickener in it, then it'll stay, like, you know, it won't be going like that. But also iron with a lot of these vegetable gum thickeners tends to kind of just corrode it immediately. So you kind of have to work fast, and you may just need to work in really small batches and make a fresh bath, do your painting. And then the next day, if you're going to do more work, you might have to make a second, you know, pot of iron and paste. You might also add a tiny bit of tannin, because that's kind of the ingredients for ink is iron and walnut, or iron and gallo tannin, or any of the heavy tannin dyes. And then that might also kind of help it because it's doing a little binding right there between the tannin and the iron, and then you could thicken it and then try painting with it. Iron all by itself as an accent or anything, I mean, iron to me is a monster, right? It just goes everywhere. It stains, it contaminates, it makes me crazy. So I'm not a really, you know, great user of iron because I've had so many bad experiences with it. But if you are using it and you're using it trying to make basically like a painting ink, I would actually add a tiny bit of tannin, a little bit of iron, and then the thickener, and then try that, experiment with that and see if you get a cleaner line.
Thanks, Kathy. So this person was asking about, okay, I've done a bit of natural dyeing, but only on cotton, linen, and silk, and I've heard mixed things about biofibers, man-made fibers, accepting natural dyes. She was saying also assuming hemp takes well to natural dyes as it's natural, which of course, yes, hemp's beautiful. But yeah, talk about the biofibers, Kathy, and natural dyes.
Are we talking like Tencel?
Yeah, they're saying Tencel, ISL, Model.
Those all take the dyes really, really well. I mean, I would say the earlier generations of Tencel used to kind of fuzz a lot. And so you would get this sort of frosted look, but in terms of the dye process, they take it really well. The other thing is because they're so processed, right? I mean, it's basically they've broken down the cellulose and then re-extruded it. It's super clean. So you don't need to go through an entire scour process that you would with like an organic cotton or a very loom state type hemp that is stiff and still has a lot of stuff in it. Tencel is clean. And so, you know, that might be a time saver for you.
Huele la limpio.
Okay. Linda Sullivan's asking, I batch my fabrics from Mordanting with alum so that I have a stash. Can I use these for indigo dipping as well as other natural dyes, or does the alum interfere with the indigo?
I've read that it may interfere, but I don't know how it interferes. So we typically, so what I used to do was I used to dye my natural dye color, so the yellow, the red, you know, whatever, and then I would dip it in indigo because I couldn't really see what color I was getting without doing it that way. But what I found was that that the indigo vat can strip some of the color off of the already dyed color, and so then you both pollute your vat and you lose color on your fiber. So we've probably for the last 10 years, we've started doing it the other way, which is where you lay down an indigo base first, and then we mordant and dye. So we don't mordant until we're ready to add the natural dye. And I've read, I think in Catherine's book, that there's some chemical reaction that happens, but I haven't actually been able to distinguish it yet. You know, I haven't seen a real dramatic change. So I think if you wanted to indigo dip mordanted fabrics and then dye with them, I mean, try it and just see if there's some weird thing that happens, then that's going to be what you're going to learn from. But I actually haven't seen it myself, but I have read that it could be an issue.
Weird is good. Quote of the
Weird
day.
is where we are most of the time here.
Yeah, the world is weird. Have you dyed with tree fungus? I read to soak it in a combination of ammonia and water for 3 months. Thoughts on this process?
So that sounds similar to lichens, which can grow in a lot of different places. So personally, I tend to avoid using lichen unless it's windfall, meaning that if I'm walking through the woods after a storm and I see lichen on the ground, I'll pick it up. But I'm not, even though I'm sorely tempted, I will not take it off of a tree. I won't harvest it off of a tree, and I won't harvest it off of a gravestone and a rock. They're so slow growing, and it just feels like I don't know if they are endangered, but they feel endangered to me. So I tend to not use them, but yes, that is I don't think I have that book here. Oops. Oh yeah, yeah.
I just see Samantha Verone just completely in agreement with you.
Oh yeah.
It's like,
So
oh,
I have this book. It's really old. It's called Lichens for Vegetable Dyeing. For those of you who are my generation of weavers, there used to be a craft store called Robin and Russ up here in the Northwest in Oregon. And I got this from Robin and Russ. I got this from Russ many, 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 many years ago, but I just love its illustrations. Can you see that? I think they're so great. They have one with a little snail in it that I think is very charming.
Kathy, what's the name of it again? So I'll put it on our list.
Lichens for Vegetable Dyeing by Eileen Bolton. I think you have to find it used. It's no longer in print. In the year it was published.
Breeze probably knows exactly that. She probably totally knows that book as the
antiquarian. 1960.
Ooh.
Uh-oh.
Not that old.
I'm dating myself.
Not that old. All right.
Oh no, it's published in 1972 by so it's a book from the UK, but it was published in 1972. I'll take a picture of this this copyright page and send it to Amy so that you guys can have a look at it. Yeah, so there's a book on lichens. Also, Karen Castleman has a couple of comprehensive books on lichens and fungi dyeing, and is it fungi or fungi? Anyway, multiple fungus dyeing. And I think Karen's pretty, she's pretty mindful about how to harvest sustainably and what to look at. Also, if you guys are into mushroom dyeing at all, which is a slightly different but related topic, Miriam Rice is kind of the godmother of mushroom dyeing, at least here on the West Coast. And Alyssa Allen, who's this brilliant young mushroom forager dyer, gives workshops all over the United States. She happens to live here in Seattle. She would be great for a Feedback Friday. I just thought about that. Yeah, she does beautiful work, and she can, like, you know, when you're out there looking for mushrooms, you can't see anything, and then all of a sudden, once your eye gets acclimated to it, then you see it, you see them everywhere. But I still don't have that eye at all. But yeah, so there's other resources there for you to explore, both lichens and mushrooms.
Okay, so Leslie Darling Leslie says, I recently purchased the rich logwood extract. I read that logwood purple is prone to fade quickly with a standard alum mordant. What is your experience? Suzanne.
Yes, so logwood is inherently less resistant to light than many other dyes. And in fact, when it was brought to the old world as kind of this wonder dye, you know, from Central America, it was banned. You know, people thought it was terrible because it wouldn't work. But it does improve light fastness moderately with alum, and then it also improves light fastness with iron. But iron will shift it more to a black or a gray than a purple. So if you're really interested in keeping the purple, the things that I would do are, I feel like the best performance is on wool, and cotton is the worst. So just kind of think about that as your spectrum. If wool's good and cotton's bad, then I would stay on the wool silk side of trying to use logwood rather than put it on cotton and then do one wash, or leave it out in your kitchen and then find out it's got some big fade blotch on it, because it's just not going to perform there.
Okay, is gallo tannin and gallnut the same thing?
Yes, they are.
Okay, that's a quick one. All right, Michelle, how do you thicken a lake pigment ink with guar gum? Just add it? Is there a recipe?
So with guar gum, you should have some ratio of powder to liquid, like, you know, a spoonful to a pint of water or something. I mean, you'll have to just try it and see what's the consistency that you like. And then if you've made a lake and it's still in liquid form, then you would just, or in paste form, then you would just add that in and mix it. If it's a powder, like if it's a natural dye extract, right? So it's not a lake, it's just a dye. Then what I would do is I would dissolve the dye in the smallest amount of hot water you can, like a spoonful of dye in 2 spoonfuls of boiling hot water until you have it dissolved, and then add that to your thickened, or add a little bit of thickened paste into that solution and mix it, and that'll be something you could paint with.
Good question from Alexandra. Sandra, have you used the alum plus soda ash mordant recipe for cellulose? Do you find there's an advantage over just using alum on the cellulose? Because when she's using it, heavy particles develop and kind of settle, which makes her worry she's not doing it right.
Yes, so the best cellulose mordant that I've used, it's also the longest, is a tannin pre-bath, then going into alum with soda ash involved, combined. Yeah, it gets kind of particle-y, but it still works just fine. That's actually the recipe that we used when we were developing an upholstery line for a customer. And it was the recipe, the Mordant recipe, that actually allowed us to meet all their exposure standards and wear standards. Whereas aluminum acetate, we weren't able to meet it with that.
Okay, is it possible to is it also possible to mordant wood beads in an alum bath? If yes, are there details you have to watch out for, like temperature and time? So mordanting wood beads in an alum bath.
I'm just trying to think how we've done it. So yes, you would just make a solution of aluminum acetate. Remember, the wood probably already has a little bit of tannin in it, right? If it's like a pine wood bead, it's got a bit of tannin. So you don't need to pre-soak tannin, I think. You could just make an aluminum acetate bath and roll them around in there and then go to dyeing. That would definitely work. Hi. Good, how are you? Thank you. Okay, fantastic.
Big interaction for the day with her mailman.
It's UPS.
Oh, sorry, UPS.
9 a.m.
Yeah, I put up on social media today that we are like fully restocked, I think, except for the marigold mix.
We have marigold mix.
Nice.
I'm just labeling everything right now. Yeah. So I'm sorry, you guys. I was looking at the backstock of orders and going, oh my God. So that's what I'm working on today after Feedback Thursday.
You guys, there's lots of people who are like, when you go back and look at the video recording, if you want to, in the chat box, there's a lot of really great information in there about people talking, like Ursula talking about endangered, that lichens are endangered, and kind of, sorry, Susanna keeps hitting on her mute. I mean, on her unmute. But anyways, there's a lot of good information there. So look at the chat box too. You're all talking to each other. Kathy, somebody had written in this question. I am interested in Kathy's thoughts about keeping a natural dye journal. What should be recorded? How to store samples in an actual paper journal? How do bulky samples fit? The results, just like maybe your experience with keeping a swatch book. And I'm sure Breeze could weigh in on that too. She's the queen of swatch books.
Yeah, I'm like the worst swatch keeper in the world. So what's happening now, because we do production, is we actually keep each customer in its own banker's box. And so it's kind of just like this archaeological layering of their fabric, their first round of color, what our production sample looked like, and then there's documentation. I used to keep everything in just a regular spiral bound notebook, but yeah, the bulkiness was making me crazy. So one of the things, if you are able to like make good friends with a bookbinder, or if any of you know Allison Kaplan of Catagolda in Port Townsend. So Allison made a bunch of color journals for botanical colors that have like a little spacer in them between the pages, so that when you put in a fabric sample, your book doesn't start fanning out, like that weird way that it does. Yeah. So that is both fascinating and terrifying to me, to see something with like just all chewed up. But the other way I've done it is, let me just grab something. So I'm not super good at it. My intentions are great, but things happen. So this is like this big upholstery fabric that project that I was talking about. And what we ended up doing was just using plastic dividers, or what are these called? Sheet protectors, and mounting it on cardstock. You know, like that. And then I would, like, you know, like we would do something like this. Oops. Can you see that? So it was just a way of keeping, and then any other information that we had on it, we would keep back here. But when I'm making, like when I'm keeping notes on what I'm doing, I have a real specific, like, I have to know what the dry weight of the fabric is. I need to know what the fabric content is. I need to know, how did I prepare it? Did I scour it? Did I mordant it? And then what dyes did I use? And I actually have like just a template that I'm happy to share with you. Oh, did we make one, Breeze, for the class? I mean, yeah, we did. We made one when we were at Haystack. I've done this before, I guess. But yeah, and that's what we've used. And when I'm working with like a designer, I also have a marker for like, what was the Pantone that they gave me and what did we come up with, so that we can get a sense of like, how close did we get, or were there challenges in meeting that Pantone, or did we change the Pantone, or, you know, whatever we did to kind of make it easier. But you basically just do the who, what, where of and when of what you're doing, and then that way you can kind of just go back and look at it and say, oh yeah, right, remember in that case we added, instead of 2% calcium carbonate, we added a 0.5%, and this is, you know, this is what happened to the color. Also, sequence is for me is important. Like, there's a couple of colors where instead of mordanting with a modifier, we'll actually add the modifier to the dye bath, and we add the modifier to the dye bath in a sequence. So that's, so, and we get a different color. And so if we're doing that kind of, you know, trickery, then I will definitely write that down, because I'm not going to be able to remember it unless I do that. You know, you're staring at a color that you dyed and you're thinking, how the hell did I get that? But that's what we do. So our note taking is pretty extensive, and we'll have, like, especially if we're having trouble with a color, we'll have the first, you know, attempt, and then what we did to modify it, and then you know, go on and on and on until we actually nail the color. It's also important if you're doing some stuff seasonally, like if you do stuff in spring and you want to see what a dye plant does in spring versus what a dye plant does in the fall, then it's really important to have a date and kind of that narrative in your own note taking.
Kathy, how could a person test light fast and wash fastness of a color on fabric?
There's kind of like these standard home light and wash fast test protocols. You're basically taking a strip of fabric. There, I can illustrate. Let me find it. So if you had colors, in fact, this is what they did. This is actually a lab that has done it. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see, like, this is darker and this is lighter? Can you see that? Okay, so what this was is we gave all these samples to a lab, and they basically covered it with a piece of paper and exposed it to light on the top. And so, as you can see, the pinks, you have a pretty big color change, but on many of these others, you don't really, right? And so what that's indicating to you, what this is telling you, is that these are not as light fast as these are, or this one is, or this one is, because you can see a real distinct change. If you can't really see a change, or it's a very gradual change, then your assessment is that your light fastness is better, right? And it's really, I mean, when you read some of these old dye books, they'll say, oh, I covered it with an index card, you know, my little piece of fabric, I covered it and I left it on a windowsill for 3 weeks. And then I uncovered it and I looked. And so this is just a more scientific and industrialized version of that. So that's just for light fastness. In terms of wash fastness, what the standard is something like 50 home washes. And then they take the before and the after and they compare it. Well, 50 washes is a lot of water. So unless you're doing upholstery or, I mean, I would say for wash fastness, kind of the way that I judge it is if you're washing and it keeps bleeding dye after 5 washes and you've just developed this practice of washing it by itself, then I would say that, yeah, you're having a problem with wash fastness. But at that point, since you've put all this work into the piece, you know, there's not much you can do to fix that. So you just need to dye it better the next time. But unless you're trying to meet a standard for a customer, like a retail client, and you have to prove light and wash fastness, this is something you would do with a third-party lab. If you're doing it for your own, kind of just to understand which dyes are better for you to use on which fibers, you can just do it at home and just observe and take notes and, you know, make a little part of your dye notebook on wash fast and light fastness and put something like this in there. And say, you know, this is on cotton, this is what I saw, but when I did it on wool, it did this, or when I did it on silk, it did this. So you'll start to develop that understanding of, oh, if I'm going to make, if I'm going to help somebody dye their curtains, we probably don't want to use pink and we probably don't want to use cotton, right? Because it's going to fade.
Kathy, so Denise is asking about using liquid matter versus matter extract. And I know we have a lot of different liquid extracts or the aquarelle dyes versus the extracts. So what's your preference, I guess, with any of the colors that we have?
So, you know, I was raised on raw materials and extract powders. So that's what I tend to have the most fluency with. The liquid dyes were developed specifically for use industrially. So they tend to be easier for like a mill to use. And I know a lot of people just like the fact that they don't have to mix something in order to start using them. So they're more convenient. I find that they're a slightly lighter in tinctorial strength because they've been refined more. So, you know, madder specifically has like over 40 different dye constituents in it. So I'm sure that they've pulled some of those out so that it gives you a pretty consistent result in an industrial setting.
So we have 2 questions that were sent in that are about painting. So how do you use dry pigments to make a paste out of extracts?
How do you mean like a printing paste?
So dry pigments, making a paste out of extracts. So
there's a pretty,
I'm assuming like it's for painting.
There's a pretty easy and specific process. If you're using a dry extract, all you do is take the extract, add it into the smallest amount of super hot water you can to dissolve it. And then take your paste, whether it's synthetic and commercial or some sort of gum that you're making, gum tragacanth, guar gum. Some people use sodium alginate. Some people are using a soy paste. I've used a rice paste before. And then you add a small amount of that into this dissolved liquid, and that's your paste, that's your color. And then you need to modify it in order to get the consistency you want for whatever the application is. So if you're freehand painting, you're going to want something that's a little bit more liquidy than if you're doing block or screen printing, where you're going to want it a little bit thicker and have a little bit more body. So that's your assessment of what you're going to have the end use for.
Another one. So I'm clueless as to how to paint with my indigo extract on the fabric and have it permanent. I purchased the BioHue indigo and also have my own handmade paste. Is it at all possible to have it permanent on the fabric?
No. And I'll tell you why. So indigo, it starts as a pigment, and we use the indigo vat process in order to liberate it so that it will bond with a fiber, right? That's why we do the reduction, we wait, we get the color, you know, the vat correct. When you take it out and return it to pigment state, the only way it can adhere to a fiber is by bonding it with some level of what I'm going to call as a fabric glue. And that glue can be soy milk, casein, etc. So when you're doing that, you're just physically gluing it to the fiber. It's not dyed the way that the indigo vat dyes it, or a natural dye pot will dye your mordanted fabric. So it's always a physical bond, and it's as strong as it's as strong as your application is. And in some cases, people are pretty good at doing this, and so they're able to get a better bond. Like I know that John Marshall uses soy milk, and he'll paint an indigo pigment right on top of a kimono silk, right, in order to make a garment. But this is like something that's washed once a year. It's not something that is going to be laundered every week, because it's something you're wearing all the time. So it's possible. It's just that it's really, I hate to use the word permanent, because it's only as permanent as the glue that's holding it. And because indigo in itself is not as strong of a bond as other dyes, because, you know, when you look at denim and the fact that they can fade denim very easily, right, by just rubbing it, you can see that it, and indigo Crocs, that you can see that indigo isn't the strongest dye to be using to try to paint and create some really strong bond. It inherently just doesn't seem to have that. Maybe somebody's have some experience where they've been able to successfully do it, but I think there are ways that you can do it, but it's highly industrialized. It's like what you have to basically do is take a piece of fabric and soak it in sodium hydroxide and lye, right, which is kind of the industrial way of doing an indigo vat. And then you just paint indigo pigment on top of that, and that whole process of the indigo getting with the lye and the sodium hydroxide will create like a bond. But that's not nothing, it's not anything that we would do in a home studio. We don't ever do that here. I've tried it before, and you know, it's pretty overwhelming in terms of the chemical reaction that you're trying to create. And you basically have to be working outdoors to do it.
So we have one more question that was sent in. It might be, I try to edit this one down for you, Kathy. So is there a big difference between a fructose henna or an iron vat? Or is the difference is it really in the indigo itself? And is it possible to get a dark blue with a fructose vat?
Yes. Yeah, so the difference is huge. I think I just talked about it prior, like, you know, what kind of fiber are you using, etc. But I mean, the deal with getting a dark shade in an indigo vat is having enough indigo, and understanding that any of these vats, the fructose, the henna, or the iron, they're all consuming and reacting with the indigo at a different rate, right? Iron is much faster and much darker, but it's suitable only for cellulose fibers. It damages protein fibers, animal fibers. Fructose seems to be the slowest. So I had a customer who told me that after 2 years of using a fructose vat, they went away for 90 days and were doing something else. They came back to their fructose. So it is possible, but the reaction is so much slower that you're not going to see the results of it in the beginning. For any of you who are going to be on the training, the workshop with Abu Bakr tomorrow, you'll see that we actually will set a vat the first day, but we don't even start dipping with it until the second day. And there's a fair amount of indigo in that vat. So, you know, you're adding more indigo and you're waiting longer. But yes, it is possible to get a darker color. With fructose, I would say let it cure, meaning set your vat and then let it sit for at least a day. And depending on how much indigo you have, maybe as much as 2 to 3 days.
Thanks, Kathy. I know you gave me some really good advice on indigo recently, because I couldn't get a dark blue with my vat. And Kathy said, just stir it 3 times a day. And I know Melissa Moses is here and she's been stirring hers, has it on a timer. But through the course of 5 days, I stirred my indigo vat 3 times a day. And then when I dipped last weekend, I totally got the blues that I was looking for. It was like my indigo vat came back to life.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that in a 1, 2, 3 vat, you've got that big old layer of sludge at the bottom, right? I mean, that stuff is gold. That's where all your indigo is. And so it's being released into the vat liquid gradually. I grew up with chemical vats, right? Natural indigo and either thiourea dioxide or sodium hydrosulfide. And that reaction happens super quickly. But the health effects of it are not so great. So we've moved from those to using 1, 2, 3 vats, and the stirring, and just, even if you're not going to use your vat, if you can stir it occasionally, then you're going to be able to introduce all of that kind of enriched sludge at the bottom back into the vat to do its magic, and then it'll settle back down, and then you'll be able to see a darker and darker vat.
All right. Well, it's 1:01.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Let me just tell you what we're doing next week, except I've buried it here. Here it is. So a couple of things. One is we have, I believe, additional classes open for Abu Bakr Fofana. He's teaching from his home studio in France, and apparently he lives on the grounds of a 12th century French abbey. He showed us the little chapel the other day. It's so weird, you know, we're living in apartments and in the suburbs and in cities, and this guy is out in, you know, the French countryside with a 12th century abbey. It's just kind of mind-blowing. But yeah, so we're doing our first class tomorrow, and they're being held in 3-day increments, three days each. And so there's still space open for next week, as well as the mineral mud. We are offering scholarships because of the time that we're working in right now. So if you're interested, please reach out. We have instructions on the website on who to talk to, and we'll do our very, very best to accommodate you, but the demand has been high, as you know. And what else? Cara Marie Piazza has her Cosmic t-shirt pigment bombing class on is it June 27th?
Yes.
7th? Yeah. So she's also doing that. She's offering this as both a paid class, if you can afford it, or a no charge class to underrepresented groups. So feel free to, you know, learn from Cara. She's amazing and super generous and funny as all get out. So I think you'll enjoy that. And what else? Oh, next week we have, so those of you who joined us for the Indigo Shade Map, the Indigo Shade Map is part of a kind of an overarching multi-generational, multicultural, multidisciplinary, amazing dive into natural dyes that the Maryland Institute College of Art, MICA, is doing. And Kabibi Ajanku is, she's a dancer and Afrofuturist, and she's going to be taking us on a journey to look at indigo as it came into the Americas from West Africa during the slave period, as well as how it's moving back and forth, and how all of these dyes relate to our history as a nation, as well as the power of the economic impact of indigo growing in the United States and what that means for us today. She is just a lovely, amazing, warm, articulate, fantastically generous woman. So I think you're just going to really enjoy that. Certainly Amy and I, when we have been talking with her the last couple days, it's just like, and she's also done this amazing documentary that we're hoping to be able to help her show at a later date, but she might speak a little bit about that as well. So please don't miss that. For all of the housekeeping stuff, we are going to be publishing this probably tomorrow so that you'll have access to it. Today or tomorrow, Amy?
Yep, I'm just waiting on a couple things.
Okay, great. So that's it for today. Thank you, everybody. Again, we're so happy that everybody's still with us and taking good care, and we hope to see you next week.
So we have to unmute everybody, but
yeah, let's unmute.
Let's unmute. I can't find it. Kathy, will you help me?
I will. I can't find it. Oh, here it is.
Yeah, what happened there?
I don't know.
You
don't see the unmute.
Yeah, that's really weird.
Just unmute ourselves.
Unmute yourself.
Unmuted ourselves.
Right. It takes
Thank you so much,
right?
Hi guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey Melissa, can you stay on the call? I want to ask you.
Yeah, Melissa, you're in big trouble.
No, you're in little trouble.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
guys.
you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank
See you
you.
later, alligators.
Thank
Sarah.
you.
Hey, Bree, stay on the call too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Diane. Or you're still here. Diane's like just getting shuffled, like it's like a
Hey,
ding, ding.
I know, it's so
Alexandra.
strange to watch that.
I'm glad. I might Alexandra or Alexandra.
Alexandra.
Ursula, what a cool background.
Yeah. Kathy, we have somebody else who could be a helper too, and her name is Alexandra.
Yeah,
She's
I go
staying-
by Sasha.
Oh,
Sasha.
Okay.
she's helping me a lot with the Southeastern New England Fiber Shed. Melissa and Alexandra, you guys should. You're both here together. You should say hi to each other because you're my Fiber Shed helpers.
Hi, Melissa. Looking forward to meeting everybody.
Hi.
hey, Diane.
Hi. I have some images from the Japanese Indigo Master. One thing that was really interesting to me was last week they were talking about the 12 shades that he recognizes in indigo, and instead in Japan this master has 16 shades that he recognizes of indigo. So that was interesting culturally, huh?
It is.
Yeah.
So